going to fry. So I wrote about quite a bit. These are some articles I did back in 1992 at the Earth Summit. That is where the Agenda 2030 plan really got going. Only back then they called it Agenda 21. And then in 2000 at the Millennium Summit, they came up with their Millennium Development Goals. That was, back then, only 8 goals. Well, then in 2015, they amped it up to Agenda 2030, and now they have 17 goals. Well, they have a lot more than that. They're promoting it in the schools. You'll see a whole array of all these different Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals. But here, this is interesting. I said they went from 8 goals to 17 goals, but if you look, you drill down, you see they want to manage everything on the planet. They have 169 targets, 3,957 events, 1,351 publications, 7,856, can't even read the last one, actions. And they keep adding to that. This was several months ago. They keep adding to them all the time. These folks want to control everything. They're total communists. That shouldn't surprise us. So, today, tomorrow, the next few days at the Summit of the Future, there are 3 primary documents that we've been looking at that they've revealed. One is the Pact for the Future. Another is the Global Digital Compact. Then there's the Declaration of Future Generations. And then they have, at these conferences, they always come out with other new things that they haven't announced. So this is going to be ongoing. And we are the go-to source on this. Alex and those of us on staff in Appleton and myself, also, we are digging this stuff out. Who's going to go through 7,900 and umpteen events and thousands of publications? I mean, you don't have time to do that. So we're masochists, so we do that. So the Global Digital Compact. Alex did a fantastic article on this, and he's done a very good behind the deep state video on this. You know, the digital infrastructure, digital public infrastructure is calling for global CBDCs, central bank digital currency, health passports, digital IDs. In other words, the total surveillance state, total control over all of your activity, over your movement, over your finances. That's what they're calling for here in their Global Digital Compact. And of course, the World Economic Forum, that's what this article is from the World Economic Forum. You know, those Davos billionaires that fly into Davos and their other venues around the world in their private jets and on their yachts, and they dine on caviar and champagne, and then they tell the rest of us that we have to stay home in our 15-minute cities, that we can't have cars, that we have to eat bugs and all the rest of that stuff. So this is just one of their many articles promoting this. Why the Global Digital Compact's focus on digital trust and security is the key to the future of the internet. So that's from the World Economic Forum. This is from the Council on Foreign Relations. Shaping the Future, Lessons from 20 Years of Digital Cooperation. They're promoting in this article at the CFR, this Global Digital Compact. So here's one of the UN gatherings from 2 years ago that promoting this. Global leaders usher in a new era of digital cooperation for a more sustainable, equitable world. Well, who is that in the picture there? That's our good friend Bill Gates, wonderful guy. They committed, he and his wife and his ex-wife and their Gates Foundation committed $200 million to expand the global digital public infrastructure. So if you loved the COVID jab, double jab, triple jab, quadruple jab mandates, you're going to love. So it's no surprise that Bill Gates, of course, is one of the World Economic Forum. It's not as well known that he's also bosom buddies, comrades with Xi Jinping. He and Xi get on famously. So here you have one of the most famous capitalists in the world, total globalist, hand in hand with the leading communist mass-murdering dictator in the world, also a globalist, and they work famously together, as does the whole World Economic Forum. So just a couple other examples like this to show what's going on with this globalist capitalist conspiracy, that C word that Stevie Kraft mentioned yesterday. Here, who's this? Steven Schwarzman. He's chairman and chief executive officer of Blackstone, one of the biggest investment firms in the world. This is Schwarzman being honored in China for donating $100 million to build a Schwarzman College on Tsinghua University campus. Tsinghua University is the premier research university run by the Communist Party in Communist China. So he and a bunch of his other Wall Street buddies have been building this there. This goes back several years. Here's another one, Larry Fink, one of the most billionaire globalists in the world, CEO of BlackRock. This is him at Davos in 2016. This is him at China's Shanghai Financial Forum, speaking to the gathered communist leadership there. And here is Larry Fink, and who's the other guy there? Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon is the Council on Foreign Relations, CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Of course, Schwarzman and Fink are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And here's Klaus Schwab with Xi Jinping at Davos. The WEF and Klaus Schwab have been extolling China and the glories of their one-party system and how they have been able to do all these amazing things. And they've been promoting this. So if you want to see how the writing and talking and warning about CBDC, central bank digital currency, for years, and pointing out this is precisely what they have in communist China with their social credit system, how you have to toe the Communist Party line or your savings are all gone. You can't access anything. You can't get a permit to go across the street or do anything. So it should be of some concern that all of the central banks of the world and the Bank for International Settlements and the Federal Reserve that are pushing CBDC are in bed so closely with Communist China. Now, who's this guy, Zhu Min? So he is vice chairman of China's Center for International Economic Exchanges. The inset that you see there is his short bio from the World Economic Forum, because you see, he is a member of the board of trustees of the World Economic Forum. He's a member of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. He is a member of the steering committee of the WEF Digital Currency Governance Consortium. He's deputy managing director of the International Monetary Fund. He's a trustee at Princeton University, group executive vice president of the Bank of China, deputy governor of the People's Bank of China. He's one of the top economic officials of Communist China. He is leading the whole push for CBDCs for the World Economic Forum. And he's not the only one. In some of our articles, we've gone into some of the other individuals from Communist China who are leading these efforts for the global digitalization. It's like the globalists have said, okay, we need to try out all of this stuff. We'll get it built up in China. That's going to be our model. We'll test it out there. And then we'll export it, import it to the rest of the world. And so we see what they've done in China, in communist China. That's what they plan to do to the rest of us here. Now, the UN and the World Economic Forum have been working together on this for decades, but it was just in 2019 when they actually formalized this relationship with a strategic partnership. And what you see here is a photo and press release from the UN and the WEF, the World Economic Forum, announcing their strategic partnership. So you see Klaus Schwab in the center there with Antonio Guterres of the UN, and they both signed it, and it's, so now it's official. This public-private partnership is a globalist communist partnership. But Klaus Schwab says, we're committed to improving the state of the world. Yeah. He says that we need more government controls because we are facing a polycrisis. What is a polycrisis? Poly meaning many, crisis meaning emergency. We're facing multiple emergencies, all these massive crises. We have a war crisis, migratory border crisis, climate crisis, pandemic crisis, inflation crisis, but drug crisis, human trafficking crisis. Well, a polycrisis like this requires a great reset. In other words, things are so messed up, we just have to reset the whole world. We have to reset it economically, politically, socially, biologically, morally, religiously. I mean, we haven't seen in the history of the world this kind of megalomania turbocharged like this, and blatantly coming out with it, explaining that, yeah, we're going to have to reset the whole world. So this is one of their documents. Like I said, we're masochists, so we dig into all the issues. Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is another one, COVID-19, The Great Reset. This is Klaus Schwab's book that he came out with during the COVID. Return to normalcy? He says never. He says, quote, many of when things will return to normal. The short response is never. Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed prior to the crisis, because the coronavirus pandemic marks a fundamental inflection point in our global trajectory. So they've decided what is going to be the new normal, and it doesn't allow for us. So I'm going to, in the interest of time here, I'm going to jump forward here, play a couple of short minute or less than a minute videos. This is one you've seen, probably. You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy. Whatever you want, you'll rent, and it'll be delivered by drone. The U.S. won't be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. You won't be waiting for an organ donor. We won't transplant organs. We'll print new ones instead. You'll eat much less meat. An occasional treat, not a staple. Got to save the environment, you know. 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change. 1 billion people, so we have all these climate refugees. We'll have to do a better job at welcoming and integrating the refugees. It goes on. You're familiar with this. Let's stop, little pot, stop. Okay, here we go. So, oops, there we go. So, I left off with that on that we have to welcome all of these billion refugees. They're claiming that climate is displacing 1 billion refugees. You're going to take 1 billion people and move them all around the world. What is that going to do? Destabilize every place. So, this is one of the issues, one of the most important issues that we can use to awaken our fellow citizens. The whole migration, refugee issue, illegal immigrant issue is something that is touching everybody. And all of the polls show Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal are very upset about this and want control over borders. So fortunately, I mean, so there's some very brave and wonderful journalists out there who have been exposing this very well, showing the United Nations hand in pushing all these migrants across our border. Michael Yon, Todd Bensman, and the Muckraker journalists, these are just some of the ones. I'm going to just play a couple of short videos. This, in the article, I did a deep dive into the International Organization on Migration, IOM. That is the UN's main organization, which coordinates over a dozen other UN organizations in pushing migration all across the world, principally into Europe and into the United States. And the IOM has big operations in Mexico, Panama, and Central America. They're the ones that are guiding here. And this is a video from Muckraker. They did a really good job on this, showing what was going on down there.
And catered to by various international government and non-government organizations. A few on the scene include OIM, Red Cross, UNICEF, HIAS, European Union, Doctors Without Borders, UNHCR, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, who offer migrants aid and instructions on how to get to the United States. Migrants receive various maps detailing exactly how to trek to the U.S. border. This map, displayed in a HIAS care facility, shows the migrant path across Panama and Costa Rica. In this footage, a HIAS worker can be seen explaining exactly how to cross Panama.
¿Cuánto es el costo de ese bus? Ese bus le va a cobrar $40. ¿Cuánto tiempo va a demorar ese bus? Ese bus demora 14 horas aproximadamente. 100 en la noche ustedes van a hacer transbordo en Ciudad de Panamá.
And catered to by various international government and non-government organizations. A few on the scene include OIM, Red Cross, UNICEF, HIAS.
There we go, okay. So here's another one. This one is Todd Bensman. He's been doing a fantastic job down there in Mexico. In this particular one, he is down on the Mexico-Guatemala border.
The United Nations is handing out cash and debit cards and rental assistance and movement assistance to immigrants to help sustain them on their road to El Norte. This happens to be a very busy office. A lot of these United Nations offices are in smaller communities, in shelters, but the people that are in this line right here happen to be Haitians and Africans and Cubans who have gotten their permissions.
And this is, so those videos, most of these guys have multiple videos with lots of good footage. We've shared a lot of them in New American Stories. But here's another guy, Michael Yon, former Green Beret, who's a war journalist now for many years all over the world. And this is particularly gratifying because he's referring to us. He doesn't mention us by name, but he says, I used to think those people that talked about the UN taking over were crazy. And he said, I've come to believe that they knew what they were talking about.
But the bottom line is, these NGOs like HIAS, like Catholic Charities, like IOM, all these people, UN in general, they are taking over countries. Remember when the crazy people used to say that? Well, it turns out the crazy people were right. I used to think they were crazy. Now I just think they were smarter than I am. I mean, because they saw it. They saw this decades ago, that the UN was going to do this, and it always sounded crazy. And it's not, because they're clearly doing that to Panama. They're clearly trying to, for instance, remove the Center Front commander and get somebody installed that is from one of the NGOs.
Now what you're seeing there, yeah, we're going to look at a couple other photos, is this massive UN facility in Panama. And this is how they're funneling all the communist Chinese into the United States. They're taking them through Panama, through here, and from Haiti and other places too. But it's particularly concerning when Chinese, who are amongst us, certainly many agents of the Chinese Communist Party and even of the People's Liberation Army coming through here. And in some of them, they actually show the military age guys. They look very military. So some people might say, well, obviously President Biden and Kamala Harris and Alejandro Mayorkas, they don't know about all of this. Well, yeah. They don't know what's going on down in Mexico and Panama. Well, you can go on the Department of Homeland Security, and they proudly have, here's a photo of Alejandro Mayorkas landing at that UN facility in Panama. And there's a bunch of photos, they're still up there. Here's another one that shows him inside looking at this model of the whole facility and talking about how wonderful it is. This is the San Vicente Migration Center in Panama. And it is funded by the State Department through the UN International Organization on Migration. And who is this gal? This is Amy Pope, who was in the Biden administration, the Biden State Department, National Security Council, and she was put forward by Biden to head the UN Office of Migration in Geneva. And so she is the one who heads the OIM and coordinates with all of these other agencies. So she is really engaged in treason against this country, funneling all these people, many of whom are enemies of the United States, into the country. She's, of course, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, as are most of these people. Of course, we keep getting back to that because the Council on Foreign, the United Nations wouldn't exist without the Council on Foreign Relations having put together the plan, the globalists and the communists working together. Here, of course, Alger Hiss was the founding Secretary General at the founding conference in San Francisco. Alger Hiss, of course, was a communist agent, a Soviet agent. He was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he placed many other communists and CFR member globalists into the UN superstructure, and it's just been continuing like that. This is explained in more detail in my books, Global Tyranny, Step by Step, and the United Nations Exposed. And in our reprint, CFR, Still the Power Behind the Throne. Oops, going to have to skip ahead real quick here. That particular issue is very important because it's the last one we have done with listing all of the administrations, Republican and Democrat. You see it has a big fold-out page there showing all the Council on Foreign Relations members in all the various departments, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Department of State, etc., under Republicans and Democrats. We've seen this go on particularly maddeningly under Republican administrations, from Eisenhower to Nixon to Ford to Reagan to Bush 1, Bush 2. The only break we got in that was when Donald Trump came in. That was the only break in this globalist uniparty trajectory that the Democrats and Republicans have given us over the past century, really.
Because he couldn't be bucked. He was the only one.
And he has, at least so far, he hasn't been cowed. I mean, everything they've thrown at him and everything. But remember, this is a plan, a master plan for all of humanity. Oops, I'm going to have to zip past this. Going to have to skip that one too. Okay, so we've had lots of cover stories and reports for the last 30 some years on global warming. Calvin's holding up a bunch of them back there. So we're not alone on that anymore. There are thousands of scientists and hundreds of conservative groups now that recognize that the whole global warming climate change thing is a fraud. It's a colossal fraud. Probably the biggest one that's ever been imposed on the whole planet. And Tom DeWeese back here has done a lot to expose that as well. And so folks, we are making headway on these things. That's why they're having this Summit of the Future. They think that too many people are waking up. They have to push forward more rapidly. So we did in 2012, we did this cover story and on the United Nations, on the brink of becoming a world government. And in there we have the center spread, which shows the whole planet and shows, using the UN's own data and their own symbols and whatnot, their footprint across the planet. We show the UN operations in Africa, the UN operations in Asia, the UN operations in Latin America, and the UN headquarters for all their agencies all over the world. I mean, they have them in Madrid, Nairobi, Vienna, Bonn, Tokyo, Geneva, Paris, Montreal, all across the world. They've been putting these markers and their bureaucracy actually creating the working, functional infrastructure of a world government. So, we have now, besides the growing awareness that has come about with all of these things that are now becoming apparent to people, we have tools that we didn't have back then. We have these action alerts, which you heard about last night and again today in our other presentations, so that you can go right now, for instance, to our JBS action alerts, go to the state actions, but at the federal action level. On the Defund Act, for instance, you can go there, click on the button, send an email. It'll give you a model that you can use, or in your own words, just type out a few words, put in your zip code, your information there. It'll automatically put in all of your federal legislators, senators, and congressmen, and you can, in a matter of just a couple of minutes, you can actually send off an email to them. And then you can do this at the state level as well. Thanks to our guys like Peter and others who are developing these things, we can now extend our reach very, very effectively. So we can get many people to get on the Defund Act, and that is something that we can see actually happen. We have lots of, on our JBS actions, we have all these videos up there that are, many of which are just 3, 4, 5-minute videos that people can get up to date on a particular issue very quickly. We have then longer videos. They're a half hour or an hour long for those that want to go more in depth. We have reprints of our United Nations on the brink of becoming a world government. We have our billboards. We need to see billboards like this going up all over the country again. People are now catching on to this. So it's really an exciting time to be alive. A lot of people think it's a very frightening time, and yes, there are many frightening things happening. In fact, you undoubtedly have friends, relatives, neighbors who have said it's too late. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, we've heard it for years. But now, particularly, a lot of people are going, oh my gosh, this is terrible. All the things we're seeing, what can we do? Then you have the other people that say, oh, well, we're going to elect Donald Trump and he's going to fix everything. Neither of those are acceptable or realistic things. Yes, having Donald Trump in there would be much better than having Kamala Harris, but he cannot reverse this. We have to do that. And I think we are very privileged to be here in this time, in this place. God has put us here, each of us, for a purpose. We have a sacred purpose here. And there are saints up in heaven who are looking down here who are saying, I wish I could be there now in this fight. But we are here. It's our glory to fight this fight. So don't let anybody tell you that resistance is futile. We can't do it. That's the devil speaking. We don't believe that. What is it? Ezekiel 33. Is that right, Stevie? 22, the watchman on the wall?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. You got to have a fact checker here. The prophet Ezekiel is told, you have been set as a watchman. The word of the Lord comes to him. You've been set as a watchman. A sword is coming on the land. There is a sword coming on this land. It's already here. We see it with all the massacred babies out there that are being aborted. But a sword is coming on the land. We can see it if we have our eyes open. And what are we supposed to do? He says, you have to warn the people. If the watchman doesn't warn the people, if he doesn't blow the horn and warn the people, then destruction will come upon them. They will be slain in their iniquity, but their blood will be required at his hands because he didn't warn them. That's a very dire and solemn pronouncement. We are all watchmen. We have to be warning, sounding the alarm, and don't grow weary in doing it, and show them what we can do. So, 3 last words. Get us out, get us out, get us out. Thank you very much. God bless.
Who's hungry? All right. Well, I'm going to ask you to stay seated. We have to do things a little bit orderly. How many of you like order? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's how bridges are built. That's how houses are built. Hotels are built. It's got to be order, right? So, speakers, right? Speakers, authors, council members. Go ahead and go downstairs, meet Lisa. Okay, she's going to go ahead and let you know what's going on there. Go ahead. Absolutely. And then we'll go ahead and go after they are done. You know, Klaus Schwab said, what we do to the governments of the world is we go ahead and we talk to their leaders and we penetrate the cabinets. Penetrate the cabinets. What in the world did he mean by that? Well, he wants to penetrate the government so we can take over the nation, kind of sap that sovereignty that nation has. But as Calvin was pointing out in our conversation, actually we don't have to let men and women like him penetrate our cabinets. We can take control in our counties and say, well, did you know that this is happening to your county? And like others have done, you can stage recalls. You can make sure that the people know what's really going on with Agenda 2030. And they can say, wait, I didn't know that was happening. How many of you have actually had that happen, that people didn't know until you told them? We're not going to let the nation fall. You know why? Because we're here. We're standing in the gap, all right? So I just wanted to go ahead and give you that little bit of encouragement. As they're getting seated, we're going to go ahead and see. It shouldn't be too long until we are. Right now, I'm hungry, so let me check on it for you.
Hey, is everybody hungry? Woohoo! Okay, so you're going to walk downstairs or take the elevator, and you're going to go out the front door because the pool area is more easily accessible than going out to the front door and taking a right. There's a bunch of tables there. There's also 6 tables in the Platinum Room, which is down the hallway to the left of the registration table. So if the thought of being outside is too much for you, you can sit at some of the tables in the Platinum Room. We have our council members and our speakers and authors sitting at each table. So what that means is that you get to go try and get a seat with your favorite person. Don't knock each other over. This is not a Christmas sale, and these people are not in limited supply, okay? If you want to see someone later and you didn't get to sit with them, you just call me. I'm changing my phone number. Okay, all of you, please be back in your seats by 1 o'clock if you can. It's okay, but Leah Southwell is phenomenal, and you really do not want to miss her presentation. Line is a taco bar. The staff is down there waiting to serve you, and be back here at 1. Thank you.
and develop the finest governmental system ever devised by man. America soon became known as the refuge of the world's tired, hungry, and poor. Millions left everything in the old world to start over in a land that rewarded initiative and hard work and perseverance. The many millions who didn't come here found comfort and hope in knowing that indeed there was such a bastion of freedom and opportunity, a place where dreams could become reality. Today, our nation appears wealthier and more powerful than ever. New technologies have revolutionized our daily lives. Luxuries once enjoyed only by the rich are commonplace and very affordable. Home ownership is widespread, and our people have the expectation of continued economic growth and prosperity. Yet more and more people are coming to realize that they may prosper materially only for a time because their freedoms are diminishing. The sobering reality is that America has been led far from its praiseworthy beginnings. Our people and businesses groan under a heavy burden of economic, political, and social problems, which are the result of a widespread departure from the fundamental truths that made our nation great. If the United States of America is to endure, citizens far and wide must once again come to understand, embrace, and live by timeless concepts called Americanism. What made America great and set it apart from other lands? Was it natural resources? No, other lands are equally blessed. Was it the people? No, the people who built America came from elsewhere. Was it government planning and wisdom that spurred our nation to such heights? No again. It wasn't what government did that made America great. It was what government was prevented from doing that made the difference. What set America apart from other lands was freedom for the individual. Freedom to work, to produce, to succeed, and especially to keep the fruits of one's labors. America became great precisely because the stifling effect of too much government had been prevented. However, freedom in America was not totally unrestrained. Americans overwhelmingly chose to limit their actions with moral codes such as the Ten Commandments, personal morality, and limited government. It's a combination that characterized America and made it the envy of the world. When our founding fathers decided they'd had enough of British oppression, they broke away and declared independence. They stated as self-evident truth in the Declaration of Independence that men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In other words, God gave man his rights, and that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the very next sentence, the founders defined the proper role of government when they stated that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. This is the entire philosophical base of our nation. Here, the government cannot legitimately redistribute the wealth, assume power over the people's lives, and dominate man's existence with oppressive taxation, regulations, and controls. According to the founders, government was to be a negative force, which leaves people alone. Its sole function is to protect citizens from one another and from foreign governments, and especially from their own government itself. The founders did not create a government to be a positive force, to do things for people, to take from some, to give to others. They understood that when a government starts doing something for one citizen, it has to take from another to do so. And in the process, it gains control over both. Britain's rulers didn't accept the Declaration of Independence, so our forefathers had to fight a war to make it stick. By 1783, the War for Independence had been won, and British forces were sent back across the sea. But the governmental system at that time was weak. It had no power to settle disputes between the states, nor the power to tax for proper needs, such as national defense. So in 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 states met in Philadelphia to revise the system. And they produced an entirely new governmental structure known as the Constitution of the United States. Keeping faith with the thunderous assertions in the Declaration, the Constitution was written to govern the government, not the people, and not the states, each of which was a jealous guardian of its own sovereignty. The founders created a central government with strictly limited powers. This left the states free to compete with one another to be the best state, the one with the least amount of taxation and controls, one where citizens would want to build a business and raise a family. That spirit of competition produced excellence, as honest competition always does. It's important to note that the Constitution wasn't forced on the people. It was sent back to the states for ratification, and several of the Founding Fathers wrote essays explaining it in an effort to persuade fellow Americans to adopt this new system of government. Some of the essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay were collected into a volume known as the Federalist Papers. Those essays provide valuable insights into the intent of the founders in establishing our government. Eventually, all 13 states ratified the Constitution, and then each ratified the first 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights, further tying the hands of the federal government. These amendments are indeed about rights, but it would have been better had the Bill of Rights been labeled the Bill of Limitations on Government. Why? Because it's vital to realize that the Bill of Rights never gave citizens any rights whatsoever. Its sole purpose was to safeguard God-given rights by limiting government power. The founders even insisted that Congress shall make no law about speech, religion, the press, assembly, the right to petition, the right to keep and bear arms, and so on. These amendments are directed squarely at the federal government, not the individual and not the states. They are like most of the 10 Commandments, which are essentially thou shalt nots. The Bill of Rights says Congress shall not, all the way up to the marvelous 10th Amendment, which says in effect, if we forgot anything, you can't do that either. When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history. And it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments, so they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany, where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin, res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the founding fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him. But the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous, or he goes free. The rights of the government aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." And John Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law and in effect built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman Constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets, demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down. They went from a republic to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite. Just as there is widespread confusion regarding political systems, there is similar confusion in the economic arena. All during the 20th century, Americans were led to believe that there was a great struggle going on between capitalism and the communist world. Undoubtedly, a struggle existed, but the real adversaries were rarely identified properly. No discussion about economic systems will make sense without first defining terms. And one of the most basic terms in economics is capital, whose definition is the means of production. To illustrate what capital is, let's consider a very simple economy. On the sands of a small island, a castaway has just washed ashore. He has no food and he's hungry. He searches the island, he finds no berries, coconuts, or anything edible. He goes back into the water and tries to catch fish with his bare hands, but he fails. So he goes back up on shore, he finds a bush. He breaks off a branch, he gnaws at one end to make a sharp tip. Back into the water he goes, and with his spear, he catches fish. His spear is capital. It's the means of production for catching fish. He gave up some of his time and some of his energy to produce something he could not eat, but something that would help him to produce something that he could eat. Capital, therefore, can be tools, machinery, and even a man's handmade spear to catch fish. Such being the case, consider that the communists in the former Soviet Union, as well as in China and Cuba, have always used tools and machinery. Officials there even view people as capital. Therefore, by strict definition, are not communists capitalists? For that matter, isn't everyone a capitalist? And so, is not every economic system a capitalist system? What then is the difference between what the communist system is and what the American and control of property is a key component in the free enterprise system. In order for ownership of property to be full and complete, all four of its aspects must be met. These are title, control, use, and the ability to dispose of what a person owns. In a free market economy, these aspects are unrestrained, so long as the owner does not infringe on the legitimate rights and claims of others. True ownership of property and freedom go hand in hand. They always have. Now let's compare the two systems of capitalism. In the competitive free enterprise system, capital or property is both owned privately and controlled privately. In the monopolistic system, holding title to capital can be accomplished privately or by the state. But more importantly, capital is controlled by the state or by the elite few who control the state. The Communist Manifesto, which contains the basic program for all communists and all socialists, explicitly preaches the destruction and abolition of private property. Karl Marx understood the powers of controlling capital, and so have all communists and socialists who have ever looked and still look to Marx as their leader. State-controlled capitalism results in high prices and low quality. After all, why would a monopoly strive to improve if it has no competition? On the other hand, honest, thrifty, and hardworking producers throughout the world prefer competitive free enterprise system for all. Here, low prices and high quality prevail because a variety of producers will seek to attract the widest amount of customers. Competition results in excellence and always has. Just as the political spectrum shows the range of government power, we can also plot the various economic systems along another spectrum. These forms of government control in the market stand in sharp contrast with a completely free market. In the last century or so, there have been basically four forms of state-controlled economies, all on the far left of the economic spectrum: fascism, Nazism, socialism, and communism. In each, the government controls the capital. The difference among these is how much is owned or controlled outright by the government. In a fascist system, the government doesn't own businesses on paper, but it does control them. In Mussolini's Italy, even though he didn't hold title to businesses, he told the owners what to produce, how much to produce, when to produce, where to buy raw materials, who to hire, who to fire, and what price to charge. The rest, he said, was up to them. The fascist system is more efficient than other state-controlled systems insofar as those living under it think they still own their businesses. Shopkeepers concern themselves with maintenance on the machinery, employee relations, painting the building, and so forth. But the government controls owners through an array of taxation and regulations. Under Nazism, which means National Socialism, its proponents went one step further and acquired ownership of some corporations such as Volkswagen. However, Hitler didn't seize ownership of other industrial giants, he simply controlled them, just as Mussolini had controlled businesses in Italy. Socialism is where government officials acquire possession of major industries such as transportation, communications, and utilities in order to leverage control over the entire economy. Through ownership of these vital segments of industry and by creating government regulatory agencies, socialists gain control over virtually everything else. Finally, there is communism, the granddaddy of all in the economic sense. In a way, communism is more honest than fascism because all of the capital is owned and controlled by the state. There are no pretenses about it. Now let's combine political and economic systems, because ultimately one never exists without the other. We see again that there are only two ultimate choices: a competitive free enterprise system in a republic, or a monopolistic state control system under an oligarchy. A moral people have always been a vital element of America's strength. The Founding Fathers well understood the biblical teaching that righteousness exalteth a nation. They also knew that expecting a free market economy and limited government under a republic to endure without morality was expecting the impossible. James Madison cautioned that limited government alone was inadequate for our nation. And John Adams observed, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." George Washington stated, "Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." Yet there are people today who think that liberty is license and that morality is unimportant or irrelevant to politics and economics. But as Benjamin Franklin added, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. The alternative to Americanism is what has condemned most of the human race to live as slaves throughout the millennia. It is the idea that rights are privileges dispensed by an oligarchy according to the unlimited rule of men, that the state should control or own the nation's capital with all economic activity directed from a central power, and that morality is inconsequential, and that security is preferred over freedom and opportunity. Our nation continues to be steered off course, and the principles that led to America's greatness are being cast aside. The simple question for us is, do we continue the slide away from our nation's founding principles, or do we return to the kind of government we inherited? Time is running out for Americans who sense that something is wrong. They have to decide what kind of a country we shall leave for future generations. All that is needed is for a sufficient number of Americans to get involved in the fight for freedom and to return our nation to less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world.